I'm sorry, we didn't see everyone. I didn't greet everyone. It's a standard plenary session. This is the room where we are having them as a matter of tradition. As part of our 19th academic conference, today we are holding our first pilot meeting that follows a new format. This format is called dialogue, and for that you chose the most defenseless person, Mr. Sobyanin, because the elections are looming. There will be elections at some point later, maybe, and we already have candidates, and several of them, for that matter. I didn't hear about that. You haven't. Everyone is discussing this. I think you are very immersed in the scientific activity. Maybe that's for the better. I'll be taking care of the business side, and you'll be taking care of the scientific side, and maybe we will have some elections in passing. I doubt it. So, colleagues, this is a new format, a dialogue. We have some honorary reports and presentations, and we have other sessions, and everything has been happening in a really good mode. We've really made people talk about what's on their mind, and so this is a new format. This year is going to be Sobyanin, and next year maybe we'll be able to bring here 2 or 3 more people, and we'll talk to them. I feel myself in the role of Vladimir Posner from Channel 1, despite the fact that I still have some hair left. Let me ask you an introductory question. It's going to be the meeting, between several political cycles. Who's meeting with whom? We're meeting with you. All right. So we're all meeting with you, and I'm talking to you. That was the arrangement. Are you going to run? No, I'm not. That's not my plan. That makes my life better. I trust you. I would like to be honest with you. And the presidential election is in the past. The president of Russia has been elected. We discussed the agenda, and we're now in our city, and they say that Moscow is Russia in 10 years. Moscow's agenda for 2025. What is it? How is it different from today's term? The agenda that you're implementing right now. Mr. Kuzminov is asking me to deliver a small lecture, 90-minute long probably, and that makes the questions afterwards impossible time-wise. I don't have the answer to that question. I don't know what the agenda is going to be in 10 years. Things are changing really quickly, and we do not know what agenda we're going to have tomorrow, especially after the most recent events. There are a lot of many types of information that are coming in to make specific predictions. All I know is that Moscow shouldn't waste a year, a minute, a month implementing and materializing that potential that Moscow has, and be ready for all challenges in 5 or 10 years. Doesn't matter. If you do not implement something today, if you haven't made any inroads, then nothing is going to happen in 10 years. I would like to say that Moscow adopts 3-year budgets, and I can say for sure what was going to happen in 5 years. All of these construction sites and these major programs are already included in our budget projections and in the city's program, and we can tell you exactly how many subway stations are going to be built, how many streets, hospitals, and schools. We can say how healthcare and education are going to be growing, and that's something that we are doing today and include that in our plans for the future. Moscow, with every year, is getting more stable, and the crisis of 2008 and 2009 was something that we were really fearing now in 2015 and 2016. That recession wasn't really that harshly felt. Our dependence on the oil and gas sector has diminished, and we have become more or less independent from that. And what used to be a tragedy now is something that we can deal with much easier. And I hope that with every year that passes, Moscow is going to continue getting more stable and would become self-sufficient in terms of its development, despite all of the external factors. When we talk about self-sufficiency, in the case of Moscow, we sort of talk about Moscow as the first order of priority because Moscow has always been earning money for itself, but not only for itself. And because of this, one of the serious advantages of this city, something that gives us money, is the fact that Moscow is the major transportation hub of the country, and right next to it or through it, we have transportation lines coming and crisscrossing it. People are not coming here to buy food, but they still come here nonetheless, and it gives us additional income. It's convenient for the cargo shipment to have other hubs, and hopefully such centers are going to be built. What is your vision? What is going to be Moscow's fate as the transportation hub? Will we be able to sort of reduce the load on Moscow? And should we ask you, as the mayor, whether we should start talking about displacing the income from the transportation system with something else? Moscow was created as a transportation hub. At least notionally, it was very advantageously located near the river at the crossing point of many routes. Any city could have become the capital, but Moscow became one, and regardless of the political situation, it continued to grow and develop. And even when our country's capital was moved to St. Petersburg, Moscow continued to grow, evolve, and it continued to remain the largest major industrial city, because it was at the crossing on the roads leading from the north to the south and from the east to the west. No matter what we do, it would still be at this intersection, and that's one of its major advantages. When we talk about the reducing the load, we probably are referring to what the citizens of Moscow are dealing with, overloaded streets and transportation hubs. But it's us who generate this stream of transportation. It's not the transit transportation, and the latter are represented by, semis and large rigs, and thankfully, in about a year's time, we would build the other loop road around the city. On all of those articulated trucks, they will go away from the Belt Road around Moscow and would go to that yet another Belt Road. The number of railroad yards is changing in Moscow, and we are doing this work systemically with the Russian railroads to have less of these rail yards, to stop being the transshipment hubs. We don't want the trailers to come here, bring the cargo, and then ship them by rail elsewhere. And these hubs are being moved away from Moscow, and I think about 60% of those cargoes have been moved away. And we have more acute problems, and that is the fact that 50% of autos on the streets of Moscow are the cars and vehicles from other regions, not from Moscow. And with that in mind, we have to develop our suburban transportation systems, develop the so-called central diameter roads, something that we've been discussing with our railroads. We should create this on-the-ground transportation commuter system that would be convenient, as convenient as the subway, as the Moscow Metro, and in that way we're going to be able to solve some of those transit issues. As for the airports, If it's just a transfer point or connection point, that's not something that really affects Moscow. But on the other hand, that creates some additional tourist streams, which impact our economy, and the number of tourists that visit the city exceeds 20 million. All cities in the world are fighting for tourists because they believe this is one of the segments of the economy of the future, starting with the traditional cities such as Paris, Berlin, and London, and ending with Dubai and other areas. Therefore, we shouldn't refuse these streams of tourists, but we probably should achieve the maximum effect and not the minimum one, as is the case today. I think your name is associated with the transportation construction and the names in your team. I was driving down the Kaluzhskaya Chaussee, and although a portion of the road had been constructed, I still see traffic jams, and we'll see how things are going to affect that. You're right, you are not a theoretician, you are a practitioner. Speaking about Sosinki, well, it will be where we will take our lines this year. In 3 or 4 years, we'll build yet another line directly for the larger ring roads of the metro system, and I hope that the Kaluzhskaya Chaussee will have less of those traffic jams, and it will become more comfortable. And you invest a lot in the transportation system. New effects are being beget by this. And the load on the city, and we are in the downtown part of the city, in the very heart of the city. We have, taken roots here. The load on the center has been growing because people like to come here and enjoy the streets here. But how long will it have this case when we have just one center of the city? This is a 15 million city. Why don't we have 3 or 4 or 5 local centers in the northwest, southwest, and elsewhere, where people would be able to come to, where they could walk around, that would become, the centers of gravity. Of course, this infrastructure needs to be developed in all of the regions, and we should hold our holidays not just in the downtown part of the city, but in all districts, in the parks, and so on. Definitely, this is something that needs to be done. But we shouldn't have the illusion that Moscow will have 3 or 4 equally important centers, and there would be a new Kremlin and the Bolshoi Theater that would emerge. You may probably understand this is unrealistic. And if we keep, expanding our infrastructure, that is something that we are trying to do. And what we started improving the city, we started that with the improvements at our parks, which are not located in the center. 90% of them are located on the outskirts of the city. We started with the Moscow communities, and they are primarily residential communities. We started with the refurbishment and the reconstruction of the major avenues, and not just the garden ring. And they are outside the center of the city. So we are trying to take a systemic approach to developing not just the center of the city, but also the peripheral parts of it. And our policy of reducing business construction in the city, such as business centers, shopping malls, has led to the fact that we now have a lot of commercial property that is being commissioned closer towards the third Belt Road and outside it. As a result, most people now do not have to travel either to the center or to the outside of Moscow areas, but they can do this near where they are. And that's the goal that we've set before ourselves, and that's where we are moving. I can identify several candidates for such sub-centers. I understand that they will not have something like the Red Square or something else. It's the Victory Park. And what is the Victory Park? What do you mean? The Poklonny Hill. I know what the Victory Park is, but what could we do there? Well, we don't need to do anything. We already have things naturally evolving there. And we are moving major events to the parks, and Sokolnik is another candidate, the Gorky Park and the VDNK Exhibition Center. They're very popular. Zaryadye is not their competitor. And the VDNK Exhibition Center is the gem of our city, the jewel in Moscow's crown. We need certainly to make further improvements, but it is something that is visited by 20 million people a year, and they have become, as the very significant centers of gravity for the Muscovites and the visitors. And at the exhibition center, we hope that we're going to be able to launch or reopen the Space or Cosmos Pavilion on the 12th of April. The day of the cosmonautics, and this will become one of the best space pavilions in the world, which will make it one of those centers of gravity, something that we've been talking about. But would you agree with me? These are mostly the recreation centers. They are. What about this city? This is a business center. It's not a recreation center. I wouldn't say that it is on the outskirts. But I wouldn't say it's a nice area to, take a stroll around. But it's a matter of taste, other than taking the elevator up to the top. But I think the city is a necessary area, but it is quite risky in terms of the transportation load on the system. But we've done everything possible to let people get there, and we want people to be able to reach that area by metro, and we're going to be changing their behaviors and would make them switch the transportation system. 90% of the bureaucrats are using the public transportation system during the rush hours and so on when they go to work, because they are the most disciplined segments of the Muscovites. They're using the metro. People believe that they all are using Mercedes-Benz with the strobe lights, but it's only the mayor who can afford that. All right, we have been talking about the various alternative centers, and it seems to me that there are several questions that can be asked, but they are related to the so-called creative industries. When a person wants to get somewhere, it wouldn't necessarily be something like a shopping mall or a strolling area. These individuals should have a list of museums, theaters, and galleries, and this is something that could be installed in these new sub-centers. Maybe it would not require too much money, but we will be essentially creating space for new cultural initiatives, youth initiatives, and maybe we can look at what some of the cities have done, where people would create the so-called creative parks, where you would invite people from all over the world to be able to perform, to display their art, and so on and so forth. And maybe we can use one of the banks of the Moscow River. It looks like you are liking that part of the city. Okay, we will study your suggestion, and we'll study where that river that you like is, and maybe not everyone will enjoy this. Just imagine that people that enjoy rap music will gather all there and we'll have a concert. I'm not sure that you will like it then. Just think again. I'm sure we will find a field for the rappers.
I think we may have similar tastes for music. So what do you think about that? I'm fully supportive. Another point. Well, let me say that our festivals are not about just kiosks where people sell stuff, souvenirs. We have various entertainment programs. We have singers, dancers. In every festival, we have an increasing number of entertainers. All high-quality sites are in the downtown. We did one project at Cheryomushki, and now the site in Cheryomushki is not inferior to Manezhne Square. This year, we are going to launch another 3 or 4 such sites. So quite shortly, we are going to end up with such a recreation site in every district. And they will be able to accommodate all kinds of events, and you can invite those groups of singers that you have been referring to. One more thing that people often talk about. Moscow is a classic example of an agglomeration. We have heard about that in the president's address. Big agglomerations, big cities should be economic development drivers. They are the areas of concentration of human resources. Moscow and the area around Moscow, all of the Moscow region, is a classic example of such agglomeration. In this context, we've talked about transport, and you have pretty much covered it. I think it's very important to improve connectivity for the residents who come to Moscow from Chekhov and other towns. We hope that they are more comfortable with the new opportunities. There is this challenge of human resources in this city. Human resources in Moscow come from several big groups. People who have historically lived in Russia, who have roots in Russia. Many of them are intellectuals. They have a good income level. They are people who oftentimes live in the suburbs. Many of them live in the surrounding towns. We can say that they are commuting every day. They travel long distances. It's a big load, it's a big strain for the residents and for the transportation system. There are a lot of people who came to Moscow from other parts of the country. Are you hinting on me, maybe? No, you are now the resident of the city of Moscow. You have a residential permit and all that. But you know that there are a lot of people who are not officially registered in Moscow. And there is a high number of workers who come from the areas that in the past were part of the Soviet Union, former republics. Do you like the structure of our human capital, or would you like to see it transform in some years? Are you referring to migrants from Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, or people who have deep roots in Moscow? I'm talking about everybody. If you look at creative people, you said that you have that Moscow has a challenge with financial capital. You think New York, Shanghai, and Beijing do not have it? Everybody has it. All big cities have it. So it is not a problem for the city. It is a task to improve the level of the human capital, to improve healthcare, to improve culture, to improve many things. Well, they are city residents. They are human capital because they are earning their living. You are talking about people with a certain level of education. How do you see this situation? Do you think that we have a good share of migrants? I would like Moscow not to have any migrants at all. But when you once go out in the streets, you may not see that in the new Moscow. But in one of the residential areas, when you don't see anybody sweeping the streets, you will probably be very upset. The thing is, Moscow has a lot of jobs, unlike many Western cities where they have high unemployment. We have a lot of vacancies. And some jobs are low-paying jobs, and Moscow residents do not want to take those jobs. People from neighbor regions do not want to get those 30,000 ruble jobs. Traveling from the city of Vladimir to Moscow and back is not a piece of cake. Yeah, we have a lot of migrants, and it's not great. I think it would be better if we did not have any migrants at all. But we are where we are. And those migrants that come over, they should get registered. They should leave their fingerprints. They should pay taxes. Same taxes as Russian citizens pay. We don't want to have any preferences for them because they are not making any payments to the Social Security Fund, pension fund. They are not paying income tax. Of course, it's difficult to compete against them. We have to get them registered and we have to make them pay taxes. We've been working towards that in recent years. Now, 500,000 migrants that work in Moscow pay taxes comparable to what our local residents pay. We have several areas. We have this common economic space, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Belarus. People from those areas can come over and there are no constraints. That is, again, a separate story. And I'm not saying anything against common economic space. It is important for our country. But we need more order. We need to have more stringent control and monitoring over the migrants that come here to get jobs. If we did not have migrants, we probably would have much more expensive real estate. Apartments would be more expensive. They make a large contribution to the construction industry. I think we would have higher electricity and water bills and all that. I'm not sure about housing. Construction business is not relying upon many migrants. Their contribution is not that high. The bigger scale construction projects are the smaller number of migrants they have as a share of the project price. We are not building a lot of housing, less than anyone else in the country. That is going to change. Are you suggesting the relocation program? It is great to make housing more accessible. Moscow has limited space. We do not have a lot of empty space. What are the prospects that you see in Moscow with the new territories? Do you think that is going to address the issue of housing accessibility? That is going to be partially addressed by the resettlement program. We probably will have extra 20% on top of the current volume of construction, and we may see a price leveling. As of New Moscow, we have to hold back the ratio of construction because infrastructure is not ready. I don't think we should build housing far away from the outer belt road. The city is spreading out too far. That creates new logistics problems. We have this new belt between Butova and Solntsevo and Peredelkina. Beyond that, we have much lower density. Further away from Moscow, we have summer houses area, and we cannot build big residential districts there. Of course, we could build some 10 million square meters of new housing for Muscovites. Accessibility of apartments is a painful thing for the residents of Moscow if you compare Moscow to other cities. But then again, imagine this. What if apartments in Moscow cost same as in the city of Chelyabinsk? I'm afraid Moscow would attract so many people that we wouldn't be able to handle it. The higher cost of housing is a natural constraint. If housing got cheaper, it would open up Moscow for lots of new migrants. So there are pros and cons here. We don't want to break the balance. We may improve the system, but we definitely don't want to radically break it. We can't even calculate the outcomes. You're right. The housing market is one of the stabilizing factors for city development. All the time when we talk about residential housing, there are two sides to it. You're either buying or selling. If you own some property, you want the city to have less property so that it gets more expensive, and vice versa. If you're buying, then you want it to be cheaper. And you also want rents to be lower. So are you buying or you're selling? I'm looking. I'm just looking around. I'm thinking about it in the same way as the majority of city residents. Muscovites and Russians in general are not inclined to part with their apartments. That's just a common attitude. Their apartments, their houses are some of the most valuable things. Very few people are prepared to part with their apartments to rent a place. Well, new generation may do that more. The structure of apartments, we have heard rumors that people are now shopping more for bigger apartments. I don't feel any difference. The most popular apartments are small apartments, real small apartments. Exactly because the city is growing, a huge number of young people. They need relatively inexpensive housing. We see the market of expensive apartments recovering. We are coming out of the crisis. The purchasing power is increasing, but we don't see any really radical changes on the horizon. We are going to continue to see the demand for fair quality but inexpensive accounts. I liked what you said about constraining the housing market because of non-readiness of infrastructure. That is very important. For the Moscow region, we have many infrastructure development projects. They're building federal highways. Central Ring is another big project. The city has had a lot of trouble because it was spreading out faster than we were putting infrastructure in place. Anyway, Moscow is doing better than most other cities. We just see that in Moscow we have different standards of quality and we're getting used to them. And then we try to apply those same standards to everybody. We keep forgetting that 10 years ago we didn't have anything like this. That's one of the areas, that's one of the economy sectors where Moscow has set new standards. That is the system of education. We are now in a classroom. This is a university, and this university has a high school that is a part of our organization, and it's one of the top schools in town. I don't know who gave out gifts. Let's say that we made a gift for the residents of Moscow. I'm very happy that you have taken this project. This school associated with the university is a great project. It gives us some relief. We do not have to build a school building. We do not have to provide funding for the school. And most importantly, you help high school students figure out what they want to do in life and what they want to study when they graduate. When we arranged this session, I was thinking what you should demand from me so that I cannot say no. I'm not going to say that out loud. What I like in the projects that you have accomplished, this transportation improvement, the city center that is now much better for the pedestrians. People are coming back to the city center. And thirdly, what you do with schools. Moscow has created a large school systems. I remember how much noise there was over this. I remember we had a lot of debates with the parents of high school students. Today we still have a lot of unhappy people. The logistics have changed. Big schools, school principals are not as close to day-to-day management. It's an issue of priorities. We want to create this atmosphere of a small school, and we want school graduates to get good education. If they don't, they will not be competitive. They will not be able to go to good universities. Or we may end up with school graduates that will be able to enter best universities out there. They will have quality knowledge. In the past, we used to say that we had maybe 50 great schools in Moscow. Now, most schools show very high quality of training. We don't want to just give more opportunities to the elite in the downtown. We want people to be able to get high quality services everywhere throughout Moscow, and that is also true for education. We need high quality schools to support that. We have to create specialized courses. We have to build labs. We have to have good teachers. We had a lot of school administrators in the past. They were consuming a lot of resources. They were consuming a lot of the payroll money. We have done some analysis. Maybe you rely upon different analysis. The savings amount to 15% of the payroll fund. This 15% has been given to teachers. It's not just 15% that we spread evenly over the whole system. That 15% was used to give raises to school teachers. Big schools have a lot of advantages. You have not talked about all of them. In smaller school, we have one teacher of physics. In a bigger school, you have 5. One can compare them. There's natural selection process, a natural competition, and you have rightly stated that we have different students. They're all unique. we have slow learners, we have fast learners. We can group them according to their aptitudes and talents so that they can study at their own rate, so that they can focus on what they like. That is a big benefit. It's surprising for me that Moscow had the courage to do that, and it accomplished this. And it's also surprising that nobody is following suit. This is quite amazing. Any other city could do the same and enjoy the same benefits. We've been getting a lot of criticism. So many parents were mad. So many school teachers were unhappy. I am a mayor and I'm a governor, so I'm responsible for everything. A governor is responsible for one thing. Municipal bodies are responsible for something else. Schools are subordinated to the municipal bodies, not to the regional authority. So it was a difficult decision to make. As far as I know, several big cities are doing similar things. Well, so far they are just talking about it. We have heard about intentions. I have visited a number of big cities with over 1 million residents. They all are quite optimistic and they have high expectations. They're saying, we are going to do things like in Moscow. You have pioneered this project. We have looked at 3 or 4 biggest regions in terms of population. They are much bigger than the city of Moscow. They're 2 times bigger than Moscow alone. We have looked at the winners of school contests, and we see that Moscow produces many more winners than those 4 biggest regions in the country, and the gap is widening year over year. You are doing innovative things in schools. We see another program, digital transformation of schools. Moscow was the first to invest in IT at school level. New opportunities are opening up. New digital textbooks, interactive textbooks, adaptive textbooks, electronic games, various simulators. One can wear a virtual reality device, and that puts you in any environment. When do they study if they play with virtual reality all the time? That is a part of studies. Many people say that offline programs are better if you have a real teacher. That's great. But many people skip lectures. I must admit that when I was a university student, I skipped a lot of lectures. However, I was not a bad student. I had good grades. This means that we have to transform the structure of education. I was guessing that back in the day. Is Moscow planning to invest in this before the decisions are made at the federal level? Those things do not come for free. All those information technologies, devices, simulators, they cost money. Are you going to wait for the federal program to be launched? We have signed a contract with the Ministry of Education, and we are building our e-school platform, and we will make it available to other regions. This will be a collaboration project. As of the smart textbooks and special software that somebody has to develop. You can imagine this developer who is sitting somewhere back in his room and he's making those textbooks. It didn't fly well, not at the city level, not at the federal level. Imagine this. We have to develop 60,000 class scenarios to cover all subjects. that is a minimum. If we create 4 or 5 options, that means that the total number is going to be close to 300,000. We don't have enough developers. Teachers are adapting the content to their teaching style, to their own plans. So we decided to use people's wisdom. That is not costing us anything. Teachers will upload their content into the platform, and then any other teacher can download that scenario, that material for his or her class. They may change things, they may add things, they can get bits and pieces from different classes. And that turned out to be quite successful. We now have 15,000 class scenarios that are open for public, and we have about 100,000 classes that have been uploaded by teachers, individual teachers. We plan to renew IT infrastructure in 100% of all schools. We would provide fast internet, computer blackboards, and this thing and the other. We have opened the platform for developers of school materials, and we already have a few hundred samples. We have built a system of support. We're offering grants to those who develop best content, and that award system is linked to the number of users. It doesn't cost us much, but it was a real breakthrough. I hope that within 1 or 2 years, this learning platform is going to get to the point where it's the biggest one in the world. Mayakovsky has written a poem that had that title, 150 million. So symbolic. This is what we see in Moscow schools. We had concerns that teachers would have too much to do when we introduced that. But it turned out to be the opposite. Teachers do not have to prepare a new scenario for every class. They can use other people's developments. They can download stuff from the web, and that reduces the volume of routine work. But it's not going to work by itself. You have to have an electronic diary. You have to have infrastructure. You have to have proper PCs for teachers. It's not very simple. One has to have a solid infrastructure to support that. It's impossible without new teachers. What you've been able to do to implement presidential decrees, we're talking about the level of wages. No e-school is going to replace a real teacher. I'm convinced that this is the case. If we don't have high-quality teachers, then we won't have good schools. We now have high-quality teachers in Moscow. Teachers in Moscow have good salaries, and they're quite comfortable with that. Most school principals that we get in touch with, they are telling us that they can choose teachers that they want to hire. That's a great benefit. It's a big advantage. That is yet another important indicator. Higher School of Economics graduates, people with high expectations, often entertain the possibility of becoming school teachers. If you do not give your people raises, they are all going to end up working as teachers in schools. Well, our professors make a little more than school teachers, as long as we can afford it. 148,000 was an average wage level in this school. So you are going ahead of the plans.
We are doing our best. Let's not talk about the levels of salaries, because this may be perceived in a wrong way. We just try to pay people for the results that people produce, including scientific products that they generate. And in this very room, but 2 hours prior to this discussion, we had a discussion of the report on education, and we discussed whether 100% should be the threshold. 100% of what? An average salary. Well, today the average salary is 80,000, but the average income in Moscow is around 60,000 rubles. What we collectively formulated was the following answer: no, this is not the threshold, but there should be some extra payments, extra or additional payments that would be based on the teacher's activity in creating these training aids. And if they get those royalties that are in demand by other teachers, essentially it's the grant system. After a certain threshold, once a particular material is used an n number of times, an individual gets entitled to an extra funding or an extra money. It can be, let's say, 10,000 rubles more a month to make up for the cost of learning, let's say, new equipment and technologies. We have been talking about schools, but in addition to schools, in Moscow we have also universities and colleges. It's a students' town. A lot of people come here to enter universities. Most of the state's universities in the city are not targeting particular labor markets. And that's where students with lower results of the uniform state exam go, and yet nobody wants to leave the city. The situation has changed. In the old, if a person gets stuck in Moscow, he could find an office job, maybe not necessarily well paid, but still a job. But this is over now. Nobody needs the office staff. They're not ready to work at the construction site, to work for the utility companies. Are we ready with this structure of the Moscow higher education? Because I believe it needs a very serious modification. This is a question for me. Yes. Well, I'm not in charge of the higher education. Yes, I even know that this is going to be your answer. This is the federal mandate. It is with great pleasure and that I would sort of leave it up to the Russian Federation. It wouldn't be too much of a burden on Moscow to fund the universities. We have hundreds of universities in Moscow, but they are funded out of the federal budget, and we just have the job of helping them one way or another. But it's a lot of resources we're talking about here, and we shouldn't be forgetting that Moscow is not getting any younger. The population is aging, and the average age of the population is growing, and it's great that we have a lot of universities where younger people could come and stay. We shouldn't follow the paternalistic policy where people would be basically taken by the hand to a job. I mean, everyone will find a job, and all of the lawyers and the economists find their own niches. They have work, maybe not necessarily doing what they were taught, but they still have work. And like you said, you have to pursue a lifelong learning strategy. What if you have a diploma of an economist, but you work, let's say, for a municipal authority or law enforcement, for example, but you have some education? That's not bad at all. I think even if we talk about the graduates of the industry-specific universities, they do not always meet the requirements of what the employers want to see, and they have to take some additional courses to meet those expectations. And these are the risks. Yes, they are risks, but if we started ruling this process, you and me, we would say that we would need these jobs, and then you would ask me for advice, and I would ask you for advice. And we're not going to be able to guess, right? I mean, 10 years ago, it would have been one thing. We need engineers, we would say. would say we need mechanics, but today the production segment is basically 10-15% in the gross regional product, but that's the maximum. That's because of the growing productivity. That's because you need less of labor. The structure of the economy is changing, and it is hard to forecast what's going to happen in 10 years, as you asked me in the very beginning. Nor would I try, but I would really want to. But I wanted to listen to a smart person. That's already quite interesting. In addition to the universities, Moscow has a lot of vocational colleges, technical colleges, and unlike many other members of the Russian Federation, Moscow does invest in colleges. I can say that the situation elsewhere in the country, as far as the colleges go, is quite perilous, because the average cost on a college student is less than a cost per one high school student. Who gave you this data? I'm not talking about Moscow. In Moscow, it is more expensive, and quite so. I said that Moscow does invest in the colleges. And by investing this money, what does Moscow expect to get out of this investment? What is the difference between the student of a college and the student of a university? They're going to be doing a fairly skilled type of work. I will tell you what the difference is. The university student is a young individual who has been enrolled in the university, and the college student is someone who will enroll in a university after they graduate from the college. That's reasonable. No, that's not reasonable. This is a waste of state funds, and we've separated the responsibility. The Federation is responsible for the universities, and cities and regions are responsible for the colleges, which has broken this uniform system of a chain of education. This is a mistake. A college should become yet another step in the university chain, and then the university would become then the next one, so that the college graduate could get additional skills and get a university diploma. Of course, you don't need to pass a uniform exam in college. Why don't I finish the college using the government fund and then enroll in the university without having to pass the exam? It sounds right, but it's not really good for the economy. But yet we have a lot of individuals that graduate from colleges and go to work at production facilities. And when people graduate from colleges, when they get a blue-collar profession, and if they go on to get a higher degree, higher education degree, they will definitely not get lost on the labor market. We haven't yet found the colleges that we would be mentoring, but I can select a few for you. Okay. Why don't we, continue expanding our experiment with schools? But all jesting aside, I think the colleges should be taken under their wings by our colleagues, such as, for example, the construction university should take construction colleges, and the same goes for medicine. And we do not, in humanitarian disciplines, have colleges that would be considered as a previous step. But we look at colleges from the standpoint of the volume of extra budgetary funds that flow there, and how many students come to colleges if they want to get an additional skill outside of the budgetary system, for example. And if a particular college is in demand, people would go there, they would flock there, and would be getting this degree at an extra charge. And that is an indication of the need that exists for a particular type of education. And so there is a certain discrepancy, which means that in our case, about everything that the industries require is being filled by the people that graduates from our colleges. And what do you think about the idea of the applied bachelor's degree program? This is the second time we're talking about it. Yes, I am in favor of this, and you know I'm in favor of this as well. But for the second time, the president is saying that we will implement this applied bachelor's degree, but this decree of the president has not been implemented, and Moscow should become the trailblazer. And as the co-chair of the Popular Front, you should demand this. I'm the co-chair of the Moscow-based Popular Front, or rather the Moscow chapter of the Popular Front. Of course, it would be harder to make such demands at a higher level, and the colleges is what you are responsible for. Maybe we should increase their status. Yes, indeed, they are ours, but that means that we will turn them into universities? No. In all countries, those applied bachelor degree programs are implemented by universities. Yes, and formally, it is one of the steps in the higher education system. There is really not a lot of difference between an operational engineer and a technician in that field. Well, this is an initiative that should be sent to the Federal Assembly, and we should draft a bill, and I would support you, but I thank you for that, but for some reason this didn't happen during the previous cycle. Let's hope for the better. In 10 years' time, we have very good future, bright future. Since you've been able to parry my question about the colleges so well, the one where you would not go unscathed would be the issue of the ecology. Speaking about those issues that the Muscovites are concerned about, something that they talk about really on the streets of the city, I think this issue is not the issue of housing, not the issue of renovation, it's not the issue of quality of medical service, it's not school reform, it's the issue of the ecology of the environment. It's not just the problem of Moscow alone. We all are the victims, or rather we suffer from what is happening in our neighboring areas, and the neighboring areas are suffering from what we are doing, what we ship there. Yes, what are we going to do with the environment? There's nothing new here. We need to collect the waste separately. We need to burn the tailings. We need to convert that into electric power. And this is not something that can be done overnight, but this is the direction in which we should be going. Doesn't it seem to you that this is the subject for a broad public discussion? And we probably should offer the people a road map of how we're going to be doing this. We will start with the separate waste collection. But Yaroslav, did you know that we already have about 1,000 sites for separate waste collection in Moscow? And how many total sites do we have? And what is the share of all of the other ones? It's a small portion. The separate waste collection is not an easy issue, especially for those living in high-rise apartment blocks. It is easy to do in the case of individual housing, but in high-rises, where people use waste chutes, it's a problem. In Moscow, and it's not just the Moscow case, it's also a problem in all major cities, but this is where we should be going. We are now gathering this first experience, and we need to replicate this experience, and if the public opinion is in support of this, I'm sure this is something that will have a future. Maybe it is time to organize public monitoring of contamination of the land, the soil, the water, the air. Let's just share this information from monitoring with our citizens. There is no issue with that. We have created the most powerful monitoring system called Eco Monitoring. We've created about 60 locations where we monitor the contamination of soil, air, and water. And every year, I should say, the results are getting better. And not just because the authorities are doing something. The main pollutant for air, soil, and water are our cars we love so much. And it's 500,000 plus with the Moscow region it's 5 million, and it can be up to 9 million. And nevertheless, the quality of the environment is getting better, not dramatically, but it is getting better. Plus, the Moscow refineries, oil refineries, that the major contributors to the pollution, are undergoing a very serious restructuring and refurbishment. They've gotten rid of those wastes that generated this very unpleasant smells, and so tens of millions have been spent on making facilities similar to the facilities that Vienna boasts. Plus, we have a facility in Pechatniki that will be converted to a sports park. Plus, there are waste facilities in Lubitsi and in other area, and they have been fenced off, and nothing is being emitted in the area, which has contributed to the improvement of the environment. We need to sort out the waste issue, and that's where we would be going, hoping to achieve the optimal results. And on this great note, using this perfect example, I think we could form the agenda of the next meeting. And the waste problem is something that emerged recently. There was a time when it was difficult to walk through the streets because of the cars parked on the sidewalks, and there was a problem with getting places in the kindergarten. So we've been able to resolve those problems, and once one problem is resolved, people demand that another one is tackled. There are some problems that have been in the making for many years, maybe if not decades, and it is natural that this agenda is some of the most important, and I would like to thank you for your attention. This is what we will be working on.